And it's now 1 o'clock, so welcome, ladies and gentlemen, formally to today's program. My name is Paul Lambert. I'm a vice president here at the Hall of Fame. And one of the joyous parts of my job every year is to welcome the great people from our game when they come to visit us here in the summertime for our 60 Days of Summer program. We're so happy you guys could join us today on this kind of humid day. Thanks for coming in to join us in the Hall of Fame. Let me tell you a little bit about our special guest today. This Texas native followed a strong collegiate career at Washington State University to be drafted in the 1983 NBA draft by the Houston Rockets. Following his days in Houston, his 14-season professional career was highlighted by strong seasons in Cleveland and Atlanta, and he finished his playing career in Seattle. He was always a strong, versatile player. He continued his work in the game. He went on to careers in broadcasting and coaching, and he joins us today on center court. Please join me in a round of applause for our special guest, Mr. Craig Ehlo.
Yep. Have a seat. All righty.
Well, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
It's a joy to have you with us.
My first time, actually. Well, I played basketball my whole life. And
exactly. It's kind of everyone coming home. We always like to think of it as coming home to the Hall of Fame.
Yes, exactly.
So you were born in Lubbock, Texas.
I was.
I've actually been to Lubbock, and until very recently, I always thought of Lubbock as kind of a football place. Did you play football? Did you play other sports as a little boy?
I did. My dad was a huge sports fan, so I played all three sports when I was up till junior high, I believe. And then when I entered high school, I grew about 6 inches and became the height that I am now. And football was a little rougher in Texas, so I stayed away from that. But definitely basketball from high school on.
Yeah, I'm married to a Texan. I understand about how that works. Exactly. Yeah, tell me about when did you first start to play basketball? As a very little kid, you started just to develop your love for the game right away?
Well, a great story I was telling earlier is my mom actually played basketball and got a scholarship to Wayland Baptist right outside in Plainview, just north of Lubbock. And so my dad dropped out of school in the 8th grade to work on the farm, and he married, and he never got to play high school sports, so it was actually my mom that got me interested. But my dad did put a hoop up on the garage out in my driveway. I guess way before ADD, HD, whatever that is, came out, I was definitely hyper. And so he would send me out to the driveway to shoot baskets. And so I played a lot of games by myself, won a lot of games at the free throw line, and knocked down a lot of shots before my mom would call me into dinner.
Yeah, well, the Flying Queens, of course, the Wayland Baptist Flying Queens are part of the 2019 enshrinement class here this year. We're honoring them for their remarkable history of basketball. It's cool that your mom was a Flying Queen. It's very great.
She never let me, she's gone now, but every time I came home to visit and brought my kids to visit, she told them every time, well, ask your dad how many points he scored, or the best game he had, and 37 was my best, and hers was 41. So she reminded me of that pretty often.
Yeah, well, one of the joys of our game, of course, is the fact that you can play it anywhere. You can play it in your driveway by yourself, you can play it in the backyard, or part of an organized team. Did you play when was the first time you had coached basketball that you started to really develop on a team level?
Well, growing up in Lubbock, we had a league that was called Little Dribblers. And so I started I think the first time I was on a team was 4th grade. So organized basketball was right then, and I fell in love with the game right then and there. So, but I was smaller than everyone else, so I didn't get a lot of playing time.
Sure.
But the year I grew, like I said, 6 inches was in high school, so my coach recognized me then.
Who was your high school coach?
His name was Joe Mahaka, and I went to Monterey in Lubbock, and it was a 3-year school, so my sophomore year was on the JV. My junior year was the year I grew and made varsity my junior year, and then my senior year, I was on a pretty good team. We went 25-4, so had a great high school time.
Isn't that outstanding? Then you went to Odessa
Junior college.
College for a couple of years. What brought you to that school? How did that come about?
Well, actually, I did have dreams of playing. Texas Tech is in Lubbock.
Absolutely.
And
a great program right now, too.
Oh,
They're,
yes.
My God, taking off.
Yep, it is. And Gerald Myers was the coach there, and I dreamed of playing at Texas Tech for your hometown team. But when I grew that 6 inches, and I still have a problem keeping weight on or having, I just wasn't ready for a D1 program at that time with my body not maturing, skinny but tall. And the Odessa coach had coached in the district that I was in, so he had recognized my name and saw that I wasn't going anywhere, so he offered me a scholarship, and I went down 150 miles south of my town,
There
hometown.
you go. I'm often amazed at the journeys that our lives take and the paths. You never know where it's going to go. How does a kid from Lubbock, Texas, end up in Washington State playing for Hall of Fame coach George Raveling? How did that come about?
That was Coach Raveling had recruited the conference that I was in, the Western Texas JUCO League, and there were a lot of great players. Actually, my freshman year, Nolan Richardson was at Western Texas in Snyder, and Paul Pressey and some other guys that made that team very, very good. He was recruiting some of those guys, and actually came to a couple of games that I played against them, and I guess he liked what he saw, and he started recruiting me, and then sold me on the fact that I could help him win the Pac-10 championship and beat UCLA was the big thing. So growing up during the 70s, UCLA was the big deal. So I was excited that I was going to get a chance to play at Pauley Pavilion.
That's that giant cultural shift, though, to go from Central Texas, northern, even Lubbock, Texas, up to Washington State. Was that a comfortable move for you? Did you feel like you feel great? My life has taken off, or was it a little intimidating and a little scary?
Well, I grew up. My grandfather and my aunts and uncles all had cotton farms, so farming was kind of in my blood, and I saw that. But when I got to Washington State, Pullman is located in one of the largest wheat growing places in the world, so rural, and I kind of fit in there. The school was about the only thing in Pullman, so I got to know some of the people around the campus, and so it wasn't much of a change because it was just different from cotton to wheat. But that song, I can't remember when I learned it or whatever, but Amber Ways of Grain.
Sure.
I never knew what that meant until I got to Pullman and watched the
them.
wheat grow and then watched the wind blow the wheat. And so it was a
Beautiful place.
beautiful place. Yeah.
I should mention, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be looking to involve some of you in our conversation a little later. If you have a question for Mr. Ehlo, please start to think about that, and we'll be happy to include you later on. So you then, I was thinking about this, you had a remarkable run then of playing for Hall of Fame coaches.
Yeah.
From George Raveling, and then you get drafted into the NBA, and there's Bill Fitch, who's part of the class of 2019. Then you went on to Lenny Wilkins. I mean, it's quite a remarkable chain. Tell me about those coaches and what they meant in your life. What did Coach Raveling mean for you? Let's start with him. As a coach, how did he improve your game, and what did he mean in your development?
Well, the thing with Coach Raveling is he's very, he reads, I can't even tell you how many books, magazines, newspapers. Before every practice, though, he read some story to us about a guy that persevered or overachieved or taught us a life skill. So those were the things that, when you're in athletics, they kind of just say, throw you out on the floor and say, go get the ball and put it in the hole and do that. But Coach Raveling, like I said, spent a lot of time with us. We had to go to his office almost 3 or 4 times a week, and he would just talk with us and ask us things, kind of like what we're doing now. And so he invested a lot of time in who you were. And I think that parlayed into the floor because he gave us that kind of time that it felt like, okay, I'm going to give him the best effort I can out on the floor. And so skill-wise, Coach Raveling was a fundamental coach. Practice was always, like I said, 15 to 20 minutes before talking. We went right into drills. And, every basketball player would tell you, what am I doing drills for? Why am I doing this defensive slide? Or why am I shooting more shots? I just want to play. Just roll the ball out and play. But very organized. So fundamentally, he helped me, even though my skills were okay at that time, prove my left-handed dribble, prove my offhand, gotten my shooting range a little further out than I had. So I didn't play in an era where the three-point was in college at my time. So it wasn't a big thing to shoot, way out. I mean, closer in is a higher percentage shot. So
Sure.
That's what I tried to do, but he helped my shooting range extend. So,
And had you started to feel at that point that, maybe I can make a living playing this game? When did it start to dawn on you that maybe there was a future for you beyond college basketball?
well, like I said, growing up in Texas in the 70s, there wasn't a lot of basketball on TV, maybe one college game on Saturday. Or an NBA game on Sunday, but I didn't watch a lot. So my dream was never really to go beyond college. But when I got a D1 scholarship at Washington State, my senior year, we were second in the Pac-10. UCLA actually was in front of us. Probably the last game that I played was against Virginia with Ralph Sampson in the NCAA tournament. And that was when I felt like my basketball career was over, because that was my last game. But the next day when we got home, Coach Raveling calls me into his office and says, okay, I'm going to send you here, send you here, send you here. So I went to Portsmouth, I went to Phoenix on these things where the NBA could scout.
The scouts could see you,
Yep.
Sure.
So that was when I first realized that I might get an opportunity to play beyond.
So obviously now the NBA draft is a big globally broadcast event. People all over the world watching and talking about it. How did you find out you were drafted by the Rockets?
So Coach Raveling was, again, a visionary, and I mean, his Cougar Cage Camp was the largest camp at that time in the country. So I was down in a parking lot in a dorm with a bunch of first graders trying to teach them basketball. And Coach Hurst, one of the grad assistants, came down and said, hey, you got picked third round, 48th player. And I was like, oh, okay. So, and then a week later, though, from that, I was at rookie camp in Houston, and that was my first encounter with Coach Fitch.
Yeah, exactly. Another Hall of Fame coach, part of this year's class. Very different kind of guy than Coach Raveling.
Yes.
Tell me about meeting Coach Fitch for the first time and what your impressions and your expectations from working with that very, very great coach.
Yeah, he is a great coach. Military style coaching. You did what he said. You didn't smile at him. If he told you to do 15 push-ups, you should do 20. But he was very fair. And being a third-round pick and going to rookie camp, the way it worked then was 10 rounds, 10 guys came to rookie camp, and then if you were good enough to get invited back to veterans camp in October, then that was it. So did the rookie camp, and like I said, Coach Fitch was very fair and gave me a great opportunity at the rookie camp and invited me back to veterans camp.
So you actually started another pattern in your career where you joined a team that was not very good.
Yes.
And they added that Sampson guy you just mentioned,
Yep.
was drafted in the same time you were, and the team with Coach Fitch starts to turn around. Your impressions first of that process with that particular team, and tell maybe some of the folks who are younger here who didn't see Ralph Sampson play what he meant, and then the guy you drafted the year after that with Hakeem Olajuwon joining the team. Pretty remarkable transformation for that group.
Definitely. So the opportunity I had was, like you just said, Houston was rebuilding and they were doing it through the draft. Back then it was a coin flip between the worst two teams, and I think the first year Coach Fitch was in Houston, he had rebuilt that team with Larry Bird in Boston and won the '81 World Championship. So Houston kind of stole him away. I think he was having some head-butting contests with some of the players at Boston. Mm-hmm. They ousted him, and he got the job in Houston, and they won the coin flip and got Ralph Sampson my first year in 1983. And people said we would have tanked games. But yeah, we only won 14 games with Ralph that year. He was 7'4", and we didn't have a lot of pieces around him yet. And the next year, so being one of the worst teams, they flip the coin again, and they get Olajuwon. And from then on, from that second year in Houston to our third year, we were in the NBA Finals against Boston.
Absolutely. What are your memories of that finals? It was a remarkable series.
You know, I played in arenas that you grew up seeing or hearing about. And Boston Garden, if you were playing in Boston Garden in June, that was like the mecca of your pilgrim, or whatever you want to call it, to NBA basketball. So Boston beat us 4-2. They had a great team: Kevin McHale, Larry Bird, Dennis Johnson, Danny Ainge, Robert Parrish, and just a great place. But the old Boston Garden, the parquet floor, they had, if you stood at one free throw line on one end, the ball, if you bounced the ball, it went that way. And so, but the stands were the old stands. If you lit a match in there, it would go up like that.
Yes.
And you actually had to go up an elevator. It was at the train station in Boston. And you went up the elevator with regular people that weren't going to the game. They were going home. So,
absolutely.
Quite an experience to have played in Boston. And my fondest memory of that was we lost 4-2. So the last game was in Boston. I was in at the end of the game. They had a 20-point lead, so the game was over with. So Coach Fitch throws me in there. I get the ball right about over there at midcourt, and the fans start coming down out of the stands to celebrate. And I had the ball, and I thought for a split second, like, well, do I score? Do I get into the books as I played in NBA Finals, or do I just run off the court with the basketball and have a souvenir? And I decided to score, put my name in the book, and actually dunked on a few of the Boston fans that were running out.
As long as no one tried to block your shot, I hope.
No, yeah.
But yes, wonderful teammates, John Lucas and Robert Reed, some really good players on that team. But at that point, you chose to move on to Cleveland, to another Hall of Fame coach. Lenny Wilkins is waiting for you, who had, I think, a profound influence on your career. Talk a little about Coach Wilkins and what pulled you into Cleveland at that point.
Well, I coming out of that third year in Houston, I had 1-year contracts at that time, so I signed again with them for my fourth year, and I learned that it was a business. I was expendable. They drafted another kid just like me, Connor Henry, same size. He was dark-haired, I was light-haired, but so I get cut at the end of training camp. Spent like 2 months without knowing what I was going to do, and I should mention I just got married, so the wife was kind of like, what are we going to do? And so I went to the CBA, actually, at that time, and played 10 games there. Mark Price was in Cleveland, actually got appendicitis, and they needed a player to kind of fill in, and Coach Wilkins saw my name that I was available, and he was very good friends with Coach Raveling. So it turned out where when he was in Seattle, he kind of followed us when I was at Washington State, recognized my name, brought me in on a 10-day contract, and I sat by him. Actually, the first day I got there, we played the Pistons with Isaiah and Joe, and I didn't get to play that game because I came straight from the airport to Cleveland, but then we did a back-to-back with them, so this is the good old days. We bussed to Detroit.
Sure.
So we got set by Coach Wilkins, and he started explaining some of the stuff. And first minute of that second game, one of the other players goes down with his sprained ankle, rolled ankle. So now he has to throw me in the lineup. And my first experience with Coach Wilkins and the Cleveland Cavaliers was trying to stop Isaiah Thomas.
Yeah, that's all. Easy. Piece of cake.
Piece of cake.
That's right.
Yeah, so from then on, after that first 10-day contract, Mark wasn't ready to come back, and the player that rolled his ankle, John Bagley, wasn't ready, so they actually signed me for the rest of the year.
That's John Bagley from Boston College,
Yes.
I wish to point out, because
Yep.
I went to BC. So
There you
we
go.
don't have that
Yeah.
many of our
Yeah.
guys. We remember them very well.
Sure.
There's another team that had kind of bottomed out and was on the way up. Just as you joined them, I wish to point out. They went from not being a very good team to being a very good team the next year.
Yeah, rebuilt, just like my years in Houston. They rebuilt it through the draft. When Coach Wilkins was hired by Wayne Embry at Cleveland, they decided to do it through the draft. They got Brad Doherty and Ron Harper in the first round. They had drafted John Williams, Hot Rod, from the year before,
Sure.
and had gotten Mark Price in a trade. So they were building it through the draft, and those are pretty good pieces to start building the team with.
That was a really good team. When did you start to say we could maybe be something special as a group? Because between you mentioned some of the name Harper and Price and Doherty, these were wonderful players, really well-balanced team, smart players, high basketball IQ players, as they talk about. Did you guys start to feel, man, we're gelling, there's something really special here?
Yeah, and again, Coach Wilkins was, you watch his demeanor on the floor, and he's very calm and collective, but very stern, very strict. And I remember Wayne Embry saying, you don't build a team of characters, you build a team with character, and all of those guys were just that. So the first 2 years were pretty rough. The rookies were kind of maturing into it, but by the third year, we had made a huge jump in wins and made the playoffs in that third year of those everybody's started their NBA careers.
The NBA was so deep and balanced in those years. Your team was a wonderful team, but in the playoffs you ran into a couple of you talked about Detroit to begin with,
Yep.
but then the Indiana Pacers were a really good team. And there was, of course, the Chicago Bulls, who was lurking out there. Your job, you were such a versatile player. You were often called upon to defend a lot of people. As a matter of fact, I want to talk to you about three-point shooting, because you mentioned you didn't do that in high school, but I think you'd make a very good living as a three-point shooter today. But who did you defend? Who was toughest for you to defend? How did you get up with your size, with your reach? You were a very good defensive player. Tell me about some of the matchups and playing defensive on some of those great teams, of course, the Bulls being a famous one.
Yeah, the division I was in was insane. So in '88, we couldn't get past the Pistons. We finished second to them. The Bucks had some great players also. And Indiana was going the same way that we kind of did. So it was a tough division. Having not getting past the Pistons, finally when they dispersed their team and kind of break it up, the next team in line was, I thought, going to be the Cleveland Cavaliers, because everybody was saying it. But the Chicago Bulls were right there, and so we butted heads with them. But every night in my division, either with the Hawks, I had to guard Dominique Wilkins most of the time, or with Indiana, it was Reggie Miller. With the Pistons, it was Joe Dumars, and of course with Chicago, it was Michael Jordan. And I was so glad when we got Gerald Wilkins from the Knicks, because now I could go guard Scotty and not have to guard Michael. But it didn't work that way. Coach Wilkins had a lot of trust in my defensive savvy. So I saw some tough players each night.
Now, of course, today there's so much time spent on tape and video, and they're studying each player. Did you do that how did you get ready to defend those guys? Did you learn their techniques? Did you just, I'm going to match up as best I could? Tell me about that a little bit.
Well, it's definitely different today. Still, I got some great friends in coaching today, and the way that they break down film is a lot easier, so each player can kind of know what to expect from the players that they would be playing. We did have a scouting report, and we had a few things like Michael likes to go right, or Scotty likes to go down the middle, or things like that. So a lot of it, I would say, we kind of went over the offensive plays that teams would run and tendencies and where guys would shoot. That was probably as deep as it went during my time. And I think it was more of just that the coach, if he had faith in you, he was going to, when you walked into the locker room, if your name was next to Larry Bird's or Magic Johnson's, then that was that he just trusted that that's who you could stop or help.
Now, Joe is, of course, kind of a quiet guy.
Yeah.
Reggie is not noted for being a quiet guy. Michael, a pretty intense guy on the floor. Did they talk to you? Was that part of the game that you just accepted? Okay, this is what we're going to roll with. These guys are going to challenge me.
Yeah. Well, I know the first time that we played Chicago, I called my dad and I was like, I don't know what this Michael Jordan guy is going to do, but I mean, and he was just like, just do your best. Just go out and just compete with him. And so I think what my dad said helped a lot. But they did. There was you talk fierce warriors. As soon as they stepped on and I was the same way in the confines or the lines of the court. It was war, and so you scratched, clawed, held.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you could hold during my era.
Exactly.
You could,
Ron Harper.
check.
You mentioned Ron Harper was pretty good at that.
Very good hand checker.
Yes.
So you could kind of direct the guy that you were guarding in a direction with your hands. So that was something. And then you mentioned just my height and wingspan. So I tried to make it as hard as I could of guys getting around me, but I would take the middle away most of the time because that's the most dangerous point I had great shot blockers in Larry Nance and John Williams that I could funnel. If I could funnel the guys to the baseline, that was the direction that I sent them most of the time, and then always thought that if you get them to the shot blocker that it would make a tougher shot. But I told Michael 1,000, maybe 1,000,000 times, like, I took that away from you. How did you make that shot? And
well, speaking of that shot, I mean, you mentioned that shot. I talk about trash talk. What I read that you had spoken to Michael before that play was the politest trash talk I've ever heard. Is that true?
pretty good, because we scored to make the Bulls, take the shot that Michael did, my signature moment, basically, in sports, which isn't bad, I guess. If you're going to be associated with something like that, then who better to be associated with than Michael? So they had called timeout, advanced the ball, and we went out, and we had a timeout too. So we were going to take that as soon as we saw how they set up. So Michael set up right at that free throw line, and I walked out straight to him, and I said, Mr. Jordan, I said, we're going to call timeout, and I'm going to go back, and I'm going to say to Coach, this is what you told me, and I said, you're not going to score. And he didn't even really say, but his eyes said 1,000 things, because, he had his hands on his shorts like this, and he just kind of looked up at me like that and rolled his eyes, and the rest is history.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it was a remarkable moment, and one of those signature moments, one of the iconic moments in sports history, obviously. You did follow, after this wonderful run at Cleveland, though, Coach Wilkins moved down to Atlanta, and you went with him, which I always thought was interesting. Did he specifically say, Craig, I'm going to Atlanta, come with me, I want you on my team?
Well, so that was my 7th year in Cleveland, and having built the team through the draft, and Coach Wilkins being the head coach that whole time in Cleveland, it got to the point where we didn't get by Detroit, we didn't get by Chicago. Maybe we're going to have to go a different direction. That's what life is in the NBA. So Coach Wilkins stepped aside. He took the job in Atlanta. It just so happened that I was a free agent at that time, and Cleveland didn't want to offer me a contract. And when Coach Wilkins got to Atlanta, I moved to Atlanta. So I went from the colds of Lake Erie to the warm, humid nights in Atlanta.
And they are that, for sure.
Yep.
And a pretty wonderful team as well.
Yes.
Not a very good team. You got there. They turned around.
Yes.
And had a pretty good run in Atlanta as well.
Yeah, never won a Central Division championship when I was in Cleveland all those years, when people were telling us we were going to be that good. But we got to Atlanta. Kevin Willis, Mookie Blaylock, and Dominique Wilkins were there. So their core was perfect, basically. And the first year I was in Atlanta, we win the Central Division and got to hang a banner. So
there you go.
Yep, it was pretty special.
Absolutely. Now, folks, again, I'd mentioned if someone has a question for Mr. Ehlo, please raise your hand. One of our staff members will take you over here, and we'll include you. So just raise your hand, and one of our kind show staff folks will come and take you over to join the group. I see Matt moving into that position right now. You then, in Atlanta, you talked about Neek and Danny Manning and some other wonderful players you played with. And you went on to Seattle for one last year.
Sure.
With another colorful coach, Coach Carl.
Yep.
But you played with some real characters on that team. I'm just curious as to what it's like to walk into a room with Shawn Kemp and Gary Payton and some of those guys in the locker room.
It was funny. I'd heard stories of Shawn Kemp, and I'd actually watched his career because being in Cleveland and he grew up in Indiana, I actually saw the state championship game that he played against Damon Bailey that had quite a name in Indiana. So he was a man then at 18. So by the time I got to Seattle, he had already done all these thunderous dunks. And, the thing that was the craziest was he was very, very quiet.
Yeah.
And he was very quiet because Gary Payton took up all the time speaking in the locker room or on the bus or on the plane or on the court. Yeah. So, Gary was one of those guys that his vocabulary on the court was
special.
Bleep, 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 yeah, special, and then get behind the microphone and very articulate.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, but yeah, Shawn was, he was just crazy. And I'd also heard stories of children, and sometimes he would bring one in and say, "This is little Shawn." And so he was a very good father, though.
Well, and there was a wonderful bunch of guys. Nate McMillan on that team.
Nate McMillan,
Sam Perkins. I mean, there's some really good guys on that team as well.
Yeah, Big Smooth, Detlef Shrimp, Hershey Hawkins.
Yeah.
They had just came out of the NBA Finals against Chicago. They wanted a veteran on the team, and that's basically how I got to be in Seattle.
And the game was changing. We would talk about Ron Harper and the hand checking of that. The game was opening up offensively, and you were a very good shooter. You became a very good shooter as time went on. As you watch the game today, do you think about, man, if I was in the game today, I'd be shooting threes. I'd be just racking it up right now. Yeah,
Steve Kerr was a great friend of mine when I was in Cleveland, and we still talk today. And I was actually visiting my kids in Phoenix and last year, and got to go to the game that the Warriors played. So came out afterwards and got to visit with him, and the first thing he said to me was like, "You know what you and I could have done if we were playing now in the league, because it's all spacing, putting guys in the corner or at the top, and then the dribble penetration kind of and kick it out and then make the shot." So
I can see Terrell Brandon kicking it out to you.
Yes,
that would work. Absolutely. Yep. Who have we got first? Would like to come over and ask a question for Mr. Ehlo? Come on over. Just tell us your name, please, and your question for Mr. Ehlo.
See, he's got a John Stockton jersey on.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to ask. It seems like the game of basketball, a lot of people get kind of fooled by, off and on the court the way you look. Like, for instance, Allen Iverson scores 2 points on Michael Jordan. Well, Grant Hill is 6'8", so we can just exclude him, but Allen Iverson and John Stockton are about the same height. And then Allen Iverson scores 2 points on Michael. Everybody goes crazy. Then you have John Stockton, who did the same thing. Nobody talks about it. Would you agree that people get fooled by that sort of thing? The whole flash and all that.
Oh, no question. You talk about styles of games. John Stockton's not as flashy on the court. He's not going to go between his legs, behind his back, and a behind-the-back pass.
Perfect, though.
He could make that happen. But John was just one of those guys that he could see the floor and see where you were going.
And Allen Iverson have any records, though? I mean, John Stockton's too.
He does. He's the all-time assist and steals. So,
AI was pretty special. John was great, too. Very intense guy. Yeah. Both of them intense on the floor. Absolutely.
It seems like people get fooled by that sort of thing.
They do. And, I live in Spokane, Washington, where John Stockton is now. And if we walk into a restaurant together, everybody will look at me and not him. So yeah, he's 5'10" and
Great family man.
Yeah,
and loves the
great
game.
family man and stuff. But did you know that Allen Iverson is in the reason why we have shooting sleeves? You didn't know that? Oh yeah, they told him to cover up some of the tattoos he was getting, and he had a long sleeve shirt on, and the trainer went over.
I know what you're talking
And
about.
trainer cut it off right there and became a fashion statement the rest of the way. So
Well, thank you for your question.
So
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Come
you.
on over, Mitch.
Yep.
Could you tell us your name, please, and your question for Mr. Ehlo, another Ohio person here.
Hi, you stole some of my thunder. My name is Felicia Hill, and I'm from Dayton, Ohio.
Oh.
My question was about in the paint and the three-point play of how the game has changed, and just your take on that, but you already gave that. And the other take is regarding, I know you've seen a dynamic change within the NBA. What are some of the things that you wish that could have been there, and what things that maybe you would change as far as the NBA now goes? Because it can be so expensive and so, flamboyant, and young people thinking that's the only thing that they want to be in certain communities. But so the two-part questions: in the paint, the three-pointer, and then that travel. I can't stand because they travel all the time in the NBA.
That Euro
now.
step that you like, yeah.
And then the changes that you have seen is something that maybe you would do different.
Thank you.
The time that I played was, like we talked about, was a lot of hand checking, a lot of banging. If you went into the paint against the Knicks, you had to go up against Patrick Ewing and Charles Oakley, and they would knock you on your tail. So if I could have changed anything during that time that I was playing, was today's game, you can't touch those guys when you go in there now. So I would have loved playing at that style. I love the way that shooters are, like Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, have kind of given the flair of the three-point, or the importance of it, of being around the three-point line and shooting a high percentage. I was right around 40, 38, 39% for my career, and I wished I could have shot a lot more from the three-point line.
You did play your way through some injuries, your back in particular. I know you had some real issues with that. When did that first start to flare up for you? And that must have been a real challenge for you to work through that part of your career.
Yeah, right around my 10th year was when I started feeling the thing in my lower back, the spasm kind of, and learned that I had, a couple of discs that had ruptured, and so when you play, they kind of band-aid that, and but I got a couple of L3, L4 fused right now. But I tell people the biggest change in the game is when I played or started in the 80s, the courts were just wood on concrete, and the shoes didn't have air in them. So Chuck Taylor's shoes, or the Adidas shoe that had no insole in it. So the technology has definitely helped. The courts are a little softer wood now. They're extended or suspended a little bit more, and the give in the floor is a lot more. But I guess the biggest thing that I noticed from the years that I played in the NBA to today is that the sets or the plays were important during the years that I played, that 5 guys had to work together. But right at the end of my career, around 97, we started seeing this thing in the athlete like Kobe Bryant or Kevin Garnett that are just so athletic that they don't need a play to get them open. The triangle offense, Michael Jordan would run it and knew exactly where he could get open in the offense. But today, these guys are so good with the basketball, and you got 6'10" guys going to the hole with the basketball. And I think that's kind of the evolution of the game, is that the sets of the old days, the working together, the 5 men, making it happen, to the athletes that are playing today. They're just so good athletically. You don't want to harness that or rein it in because they're so good and create.
Just two quick questions as we wrap up. You talk about some of the great players you did have to guard against, the iconic moment against Michael and all. Was there one guy in particular you said, oh man, I don't want to have to check him? He was just the toughest guy to guard every night.
Well, I get a few letters today asking me that same question, and of course, I can say the Michaels or the Reggies or those, but the one I really hated to guard was Larry Bird. He was not a nice guy. Matter of fact, there was one game in Cleveland where he was having a pretty rough first half, and in the old days in Cleveland, you walked off the court the same way at halftime, and I kind of puffed up on him and walked beside him and was like, yeah, you're 1 for 10. I was like, that's defense, and he just kind of looked at me and said, there's 2 halves. And he came back out and hit about 10 in a row on me, and the last one was left-handed, and he asked me if my mother was watching because he wanted to embarrass me. So, yeah, so he was tough. And then in the other conference, a guy that doesn't get a lot of publicity or should is Clyde Drexler. Just so quick, fast, jump over you, strong. And just kind of a different style of a player than a finesse player. He was kind of physically brutish to get where he wanted to go.
Very talented. Yeah, and then all these great teammates. You had so many great teammates from college all the way through the pros. Was there one guy you said, man, that was my man. That's my teammate. That I loved playing with him especially.
I knew him as Hakeem, and come to find out, his name is Akeem, and the dream shake is real. Yeah. I watched him at Phi Slamma Jamma because I was in Houston at that time, so I watched him. But this kid had never played basketball until he got to Houston, and his ability. I remember, like I said, the floors were hard. I remember I came out one day right after him, and he was doing these Pele kicks because he was a soccer player. Yeah. And, he's 6'10" and landed on his back and kicking a basketball through, this big of a screen. And we were just like, that's insane. Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. And his English was a little hard to understand, but he was one of those guys that you just loved being around. And there was a place in Houston that Fondy, where we kind of played. Moses Malone kind of made it, the big name there. But I remember walking in with Dream, and just having his arm around you kind of gave you the clout you needed to get in there.
He was an ambassador, global ambassador for the game.
Yes, still is, yeah.
And it's a joy to have you here with us today. Mr. Ehlo is going to be over here to sign autographs. If anyone would like to come over and say hello, please do. But before we do that, please join me in one more round of applause for our special guest, Mr. Craig Ehlo. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Paul.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah.